All right, joining me now, very excited to have this conversation. He is an independent journalist, had a huge story in the New York Times this week, another story for Yahoo, which we'll get into, formerly of ESPN and Bleacher Report. He is, again, independent journalist Joon Lee. Joon, thanks for doing this. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jimmy. I appreciate it. I've been following your tweets and reading your columns for a long time, your Traina Thoughts.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That means a lot. It's rare these days when I see a piece and I'm like, I've got to get that person on the podcast. But you wrote a piece for the Times earlier this week about the cost of being a sports fan, in terms of watching and in terms of going to games. And I have ranted and raved weekly for years now on this podcast about the streaming. I mean, to the point where I know my listeners are sick of it. I haven't done it as much about going to games, but I have said many times, I mean, I can't remember the last time I was at a sporting event, and it's the cost. And a lot of times people come back and say, "Oh, what, you can't afford it, or why can't or this streaming service is $4.99 a month, you could afford it." But the totality of it is what is absurd, and the prices at ballparks is absurd. So before we get into it all, give me was this something you wanted to do, or did someone pitch this idea to you? Tell me how it came about, this story.
I mean, I think I've been frustrated with it for many years. And I say this as a 30-year-old who grew up on the internet, ostensibly tech fluent, but also it's been harder to just watch sports. It feels like you need a spreadsheet these days to figure out where the game was. And I think I've tried my best to never become a back in my days type of person, but
Right.
It is notable when you used to be able to just turn on the TV and sports was there and you could just watch it. And now it's kind of in a place where you just feel like you have to plan around it a lot more than you used to. It's just harder to just kind of casually have it on. At the same time, obviously you can watch way more things. There's way more niche broadcasts than there used to be. My parents on and off had cable as a kid growing up. So, for most of my childhood, I was mostly following sports on the radio and whenever games were on national TV. And so it's something that's just always been on my mind. And when I was at ESPN, it was something that I thought a lot about because baseball is having a lot of issues with blackouts. And then when I got laid off from ESPN in 2023, and I spent 2 years writing out a non-compete on my contract there. And I just had an opportunity to just be a sports fan again without any obligation to, get some takes off or write a story off of it or call anyone. And it really opened my eyes because over the course of those 2 years, things just got progressively worse. I think the breaking point for me was when they were forcing people to sign up for Peacock for a playoff game, and
Right.
how angry, I would say most of the internet was about that whole experience. And, I'm someone who, grew up on YouTube, loves streaming stuff, and it has been great for the entertainment experience in some ways. But just the fact that you just need so many different things is so frustrating. And I cited this example in the piece, but it was for me as a Red Sox fan living in New York. I'm currently actually in Boston right now, but day to day I live in New York, and I can watch the Red Sox on MLB TV, most nights. But when the Red Sox come into town or the Yankees come into town and they're playing, if they're not on national TV, the game is blacked out for me. And I would either have to sign up for NESN 360 or Gotham Sports Network. And it's I basically have every other streaming network.
Right.
It is insane that I'm in a position where I kind of have to pay 20 or 30 bucks a month to watch this one game, that really just pushes me over the edge. And I know that I'm in a position where, I have the capability to pay for all these things. That's not most people in America, especially given the state of, the up and downs of the economy and, just people worried about, buying eggs. That's such a huge conversation nationally on a day-to-day basis. Sports is almost a secondary thought. And so when you kind of pull that back and you see people complaining about the price of eggs while all of this stuff is happening around sports and streaming, sports has always been one of the last things that I can talk about with a stranger, whether it's on the subway, at the water cooler, just out and about. And I just noticed that the gap between a hardcore sports fan and a casual sports fan, or even someone who doesn't care about sports, is going wider and wider because of these gaps in access. And I really think that has a big role in the conversations that we're having in this country around political polarization, and also the conversation around young men as well. I think that all of these things are kind of small factors in the snowball effect of where our culture is as a country right now.
There's a lot there and a lot I want to get into. And I should have mentioned at the top, if you want to Google or look at Joon's Twitter for the article, it's the New York Times. The title of the article, $4,785. That's how much it costs to be a sports fan now. You talked about the access that everyone has now. You can basically watch any game on any night. And when I complain about streaming, and what I usually tweet is, this is the worst time ever to be a sports fan, which I believe, but I'll explain. I always get that reply. You're an idiot. You can watch any game at any time. Everything's available. And maybe this is a chicken and egg thing, but I feel like because everything is available, nothing is special anymore outside of maybe the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like when NBA wasn't available all the time, the game on TNT used to be a big deal during the regular season. Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN would be a big deal. An all-star game would be a big deal. None of it's a big deal anymore because you can watch anything at any time. Now, some people think that's good. Some people think I'm in the camp that it's not good. I like how often during the year do you feel that big time sports event? The Masters, the Super Bowl, AFC, NFC champion. I mean, no one cares about the NBA Finals. No one cares about the Stanley Cup. I mean, from a rating standpoint, the first 2 weekends of the NCAA tournament are a big deal. Outside of those 2 days, college basketball is completely off the map in this country. So, like, nothing feels big anymore because it's all available to us. Where do you stand on that?
There's like 5 different threads here, I think, that are really important to break down. I think the first one, I think, ties into the conversation people have been having around the NBA Finals with the presentation. And I think last night they did the player introductions for the first time in like a decade. The Finals, in terms of presentation, doesn't feel special in the way that, obviously with the caveat, like ESPN is my ex-employer, like they don't broadcast in a way that makes it feel big. And they definitely used to do that in the 2000s. And my hope is that they kind of go back towards that. I would push back a little bit in that, like, for me, Sunday Night Football still feels like a really big deal because NBC leans all the way into kind of the premium production, the video introductions of the players. Even the music is like very cinematic. Like it feels epic in terms of the presentation. That's something that I think has kind of gone away. And I think it's emblematic of so many things that are happening in sports media right now where, the irony is that this column was behind a paywall at the New York Times, but so much of like sports journalism today is behind a paywall for like very necessary business reasons, is behind a paywall. Like people need to make salaries and keep this up. At the same time, there's not a lot of places to get good sports journalism today for free. And that's why people are going to Twitter. The problem with that, though, is that Twitter is really, really bad at crafting big narratives that make you feel like games are special because it's one tweet and then you're on to the next thing. Whereas like, back in the day, you'd read the newspaper feature, the pregame, the pregame show, video feature on, the star player of the team. You had all these like kind of small things over the course of a week that built up to it. And this really jumped out to me during my time off because, as a hardcore Boston sports fan, like I'm watching a lot of sports media, and Boston is one of the few markets in the country alongside like New York, LA, and Chicago and Philadelphia, where there is this robust local sports media atmosphere where they can get people interested in sports without having to talk about gambling at all. And I think that plays a big role in why these cities are still invested in these teams. In Boston, Felger and Maz, huge part of the city's sports talk radio culture. The regional sports networks here, NBC Sports Boston, like they have 2 nightly shows where they talk about the drama and the soap opera of the team. It gets people invested in these teams. There's a robust podcast network. Jared Carrabis is a huge Boston Red Sox podcaster. There's ways to get in and be able to access good information, whether it's for free or for cheap in Boston. I think that's part of why ratings are generally up in Boston. People still go to games here, and the local sports culture, is is affected by everything going on because people are cutting the cord, but is a little bit more insulated, relatively speaking, compared to other markets. And so I think that plays a role in it as well. I think that there's just so many different threads happening where it's the entire sports media ecosystem, and it's part of why like I've launched a YouTube channel where I'm trying to tell kind of these big macro stories about the state of sports, because there is a demand for this kind of stuff. I'm 6 videos in. Half of my videos have 100,000 views. I did a video on Fanatics and how Fanatics has become a monopoly in sports merchandising. That video is 300,000 views. And like, we haven't even touched some of the bigger stories in sports yet in the 2.5 months there. There's a demand for this kind of stuff. I just think fans don't know where to find it yet without having to pay money.
And in the defense of fans, it's hard to find things because there's so much out there. You've got to sift through so much. I just want to follow up on a few things you said there. It's funny. I put here, I don't usually write questions. I just jot down some notes. The first note I have at the very top of my page underneath your name is the word paywall, because I wanted to start the discussion by saying, yes, I know Joon's column was behind a paywall, because when I tweeted it on Monday, I got a bunch of tweets back saying, ironic that it's behind a paywall. And it's like, Joon is not the one installing a paywall at the New York Times, and I wouldn't be the one installing a paywall for Sports Illustrated. So, I wanted to get that out of the way for people who want to be a wise ass and then say, oh, you had him on, his article is behind a paywall. And the other thing is, you mentioned about people going to Twitter for information when it comes to sports. And I have to wonder, and I think we're at the point now where it's so dangerous now to use Twitter. Did you see this story this week with the Caitlin Clark with the fever ratings?
I did not.
Okay, so a fake parody, fake, whatever you call it, account put out a tweet saying that the Fever game against the Liberty on Saturday got 20 million viewers. Now, the game actually got 2.2 million viewers, but Google, with their new AI system, picked that up as a fact that it got 20 million viewers, when in fact the viewership was 2 million. So in addition to everything else, you just have no idea what's true, what's not true, and the AI situation is going to get worse and worse and worse. But that's off the beaten path. Let me bring it back sort of the costs here for a second. So the headline says 4,785. That's how much it costs to be a sports fan. Give the readers a little bit of background on how you got to that figure and what went into it.
So I did a YouTube video on this topic, which is where that number comes from. You can go check that out on my channel. It is the cost, I believe, for a casual fan. Right. It is the cost of cable subscription to watch all games. So like in the past, it would be just, one cable subscription. Now it's all the streaming services necessary to watch a game. And then I believe it's one cost of a ticket and the cost of one hat and one jersey.
So you didn't even factor in food concessions.
I did not factor in food or concessions.
Oh my God. You didn't even factor that in. That number should be way bigger.
Yeah. So
I always think about what I can't stop thinking about is the mom and dad, or dad and dad, or mom and mom, who want to go to a game with 2 kids. They're not getting out of there for ticket, parking, 1 soda, 1 hot dog. If you're looking to get out of there for under $500. What turned me off from going to sporting events was when Yankee Stadium started charging $40 to park the car. That's when I said, fuck them, basically. This is gouging to the highest degree. And I mean, okay, they got you trapped in there. So $8 for a soda, $6 for a bottle of water. Maybe that's on you. The parking is what really pushed me over the edge. And I don't know, like I said, you're a family of 4. How many games can you go to a year? Not that many.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big stat that I took away from it is that the average wage in America has risen 87% in the last 20 years. And the cost of going to a sports game, whether you're a casual fan or a hardcore fan, has gone up about 250%. So it is a staggering difference between, people constantly complain about wages not going up fast enough. And so when you contrast that with just how expensive it is to just be a sports fan now on almost a baseline level, it kind of exacerbates all of that.
Right. And that's the other issue too. So if you're a sports fan who's going to pay a couple of $1,000s a year for the streaming, then you're going to go spend that kind of money on a game. Like, how much are you going to spend just to be a sports fan? I'm curious. When you did the figure for the streaming, you had $2,634 would be the cost for, and you didn't even include. I don't think you included Sunday Ticket in there, correct?
There's if you go to the video, there's two different calculations. There's one for a casual fan, and then there's one for a hardcore fan that includes like MLB TV, Sunday Ticket, all that stuff.
Yeah, Sunday Ticket that's the biggest nut of them all. It's like $400-$500 right now these days.
But at least the service is good now. Like when it was on DirecTV, the streaming version of it was terrible, and now at least the YouTube TV interface is quite good.
Yeah, YouTube could not have done a better job with Sunday Ticket, and I say that as someone who had it for DirecTV for 20 years. YouTube's been a billion times better with Sunday Ticket. I wrote down a couple of notes from the story I wanted to get into. One of them was what you just mentioned. From 99 to 2020, the cost to go to a game rose, basically doubled. No, it was twice. It rose twice as fast as overall consumer.
Yes.
Other consumer things. Then from May 2023 to May 2025, it rose 19%. I don't want to get into a whole political thing here, but I'm a strong believer that a lot of the costs that have gone up since 2020 is companies gouging from COVID. Do you think that's a factor in the sports world?
I mean, I can't say for sure, but this is just a trend across corporate America. Like the moment that really jumped out to me. So my fiance is from Malaysia. We went over to Malaysia, and there's the currency exchange from the US dollar to Malaysian dollar is very, very good and favorable for Americans with the dollar. We went to a COS like shop there. You know, it's an H&M sub brand, and I looked at this cost of like a knit button-up polo shirt there. And it was like 1/3 of the price in Malaysia that it was in the United States. And it made me sit back and be like, wait a minute. So I'm basically halfway across the world right now. I can get the same shirt in Malaysia for 1/3 of the price that I can get for it in the United States. There's something that doesn't add up from a math standpoint here.
Right. It doesn't add up. It makes no sense. And the issue too this is a really in the weeds thing, but in terms of sports, I've always felt like too, when you go to a game, you know, whether it's the cost of a hat, a t-shirt, a soda, a beer, a hot dog, the ticket, those prices in a way have to be that high because of what owners are now paying players. Like if the Mets are going to pay Juan Soto $720 million, they can't sell a hot dog for $1. Like as everyone's salary in sports, owners take is more than ever. Players are making more than ever. It's the sports fan who pays for it, and I don't think the sports fan understands that.
Well, I think it's a little bit more complicated because when you look at baseball in particular, the most profitable owner in baseball, or at least one of them, is Bob Nutting of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and it's because he doesn't pay his players anything.
Right,
like he pockets more money year to year.
Right.
I think the thing that the high cost of player salary does allow teams to do is give them cover to raise prices. Because like if you look at the Boston Celtics, for example, when they won the championship 2 years ago and they went out twice over the luxury tax in the second apron or whatever, you know, they on paper from a book standpoint did not make as much money as an average person would expect a team to make the year they won a championship. Winning a championship is really, really expensive. Being a good sports team is really expensive.
Right.
They're now, you know, this franchise just sold for $6.1 billion and private equity is involved in all this other thing. I think the thing that is really getting underplayed in the current cost of all this stuff, the reason why owners are cutting back on salary, this just happened in Boston with Rafael Devers. You know, it's happening right now with the Celtics too, as the new ownership group comes in. Rumors about them breaking up this Celtics core is that there's more and more international money and private equity money coming into sports. On paper, sports is a really weird, bad business because to be good, you have to make less money. You know, that's not what like Domino's Pizza operates like, more franchises open, you sell more pizzas, you make more money. Sports is like kind of backwards in that sense, where it's like the better you are, almost the less money you make, unless you're, the Tampa Bay Rays.
Because you're spending money on payroll?
Because you tend to be spending money on payroll unless you're, the Tampa Bay Rays or a similar team like that, or
Right.
you're a really, really young group of core players there.
Right.
The way that these billionaires are able to make a ton of money and why the franchise valuations are going up right now, despite player salaries skyrocketing, is because of the massive amount of speculation that people have around the international growth of sports. It is the central focus for every single sports league right now and is completely underplayed in all of the media, in my opinion. When I talk to executives at the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, their number one focus is growing sports internationally around the world, because they want the Yankees or the Dodgers to have more fans abroad than they do in the United States, because that's what makes their financial ceiling as big as possible. They want to copy the Premier League. The Premier League, if you look at the data, there was a Seton Hall poll that just came out a couple months ago about sports fandom. For fans under the age of 35, Major League Baseball and the Premier League are just about neck and neck in regards to hardcore sports fans. Like, I'm 30 years old. I'm a huge Premier League fan. I'm a big Liverpool fan. My friends are huge soccer fans. There's a huge generation gap there, but they're looking at my generation being huge fans of Liverpool and the Premier League and international soccer in general. And they're saying, oh, if we spend the next 10 years building and developing, these fan bases around the world, we're going to be able to make a ton more money abroad than we actually do in the United States. I was talking to an executive over at the NBA and a couple months back, and they were telling me that this is not an every single night, but there are some nights now where the biggest market for live games for the NBA on TV is not the United States, it's China. They're getting more live viewers per game in China on some nights than in the United States. And that is the future of where all of this is headed. When the Dodgers went over to Japan to start the season, Shohei Ohtani brought in, I think it was like 27 million viewers. That was bigger than like most World Series broadcasts. Like, that is the future of where all of this is headed. And so even though they're not making as much money on a yearly basis, their goal is to, grow internationally. And the reason why a lot of these owners are looking for more cash right now, or raising the prices of everything, is because they need to invest in the marketing and the infrastructure to be able to grow these teams around the world. So, player salaries, that's kind of the cost of doing business to some degree. Why they really need the cash right now is to push the growth of sports around the world.
You see it so much with the NFL, with their international games. And I said this, I think, on the pod a few times, like the way the NFL wants to push those 9:30 international games, but the fan here, nobody cares. There's not one fan who cares if the Jaguars and Titans are playing in Brazil, or London. But the NFL acts like it's such a big deal, and Joon just perfectly explained why that is. Again, but that all gets, I feel like it all gets away from the sports fan, the traditional sports fan here, with the streaming and the international, and it's just going to get worse. There were a couple of quotes in the story I wanted to ask you about, or have you elaborate on, that I found really interesting. And one of my when I complain about, like I said earlier, when I complain about all the streaming services for sports, people right away think it's about the cost. And I always say, it's not just about the cost. I mean, yes, it's gotten completely out of control, but I hate watching a game on streaming because you can't flip channels. And what I also hate is when there's a game on streaming, it just kills the bars and the restaurants. The Yankees played on Apple TV a couple of weeks ago. I'm out to dinner on a Friday night. Like, I have no chance. There's just no chance on Apple TV. You had a quote in your story from someone who owned a bar restaurant. I think it was in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And she said, you turned on the TV. No, that's the wrong quote. I'm standing out in the middle of the room, almost in tears, because I can't get the game on. And that's someone who owns a bar. It is a huge change for sports fans that, now you're going to say, now the person listening might say, well, all they have to do is get an Apple TV box. All they have to do is subscribe to this, get a smart TV. But like, this is not like the priority, the number one priority for bar and restaurant, but it is a big, big factor.
Yeah, it's a huge thing that's happening. I mean, this actually got cut from an earlier draft, but I have multiple friends who have gotten free beers at sports bars because they have logged into their YouTube TV account or their Apple TV account to broadcast games at a sports bar. Like,
That's
that's
funny.
nuts.
Yeah.
That's where we're at in
Yeah.
regards to this streaming landscape right now. And I
Right.
think that it's one of those small things where it's like, the fragmentation's happening, and that's a lot of it's that is at home. But when that stuff is happening at the sports bar, when you can't just assume that you can go to a sports bar and catch a game now, it changes the community feel around it. Iowa has an enormous number of blackouts for the NBA and Major League Baseball. I think they have 6 teams blacked out on MLB TV, and they have 4 or 5 teams in Iowa. And it there's no professional sports team in Iowa, and they're in a position where they want to watch sports. They can get Caitlin Clark games on because they make it a priority. But otherwise, the bar owner, told me as well on top of that in that interview that, people just spend less time at the bar now because they're not completely, if the game's on stream, they're like, oh, I'll just go home instead. So instead of spending like 5 hours, they're spending 2 hours at the bar. They're just eating dinner and going home. And so like those small things add up, I don't think it's this like big conspiracy that the league's like, we're trying to make any of this happen, but it's just all these small decisions just add up over the course of a decade and lead to the environment being like this in the way that it is right now.
The leagues just want every penny they can get. There's never enough for the leagues. It's if you can get one more penny, we're going to get one more penny. I mean, that's basically the philosophy. The other quote from the story that I started to read, it was the wrong quote, but it comes early in your story. And you had mentioned this earlier. You said in the story back years ago, you turned on the TV, flipped to the game, cheered or booed. And when I saw that sentence, I said, just in that sentence, you turned on the TV, flipped to the game. That is almost impossible to do now because you never know where a game is. I mean, just as a Yankee fan, on any given day, they can be on Amazon, Apple, Roku, yes, Fox, FS1, ESPN. I'm probably leaving one out or two. And you touched on it. And it used to be, and then I always say, how come I don't know where the Yankee game is? Because I used to actually read my whole life the hard copy of the newspaper. And in the sports section, they had the TV schedule. So you'd see, the next 3 games are on Yes, Saturday they're on Fox, Sunday. But I don't read the hard copy of the newspaper anymore. I wish I did. It's probably bad to admit that in my business, but I read everything online. And I never know when the Yankees are on. And it happened with the NBA Finals. Everyone thought the NBA Finals game last week was going to be on. What day was it? They didn't play one night, and they didn't play Tuesday. They played Wednesday. Everyone went to the game on Tuesday. The leagues are not helping by putting everything all over the place, and you never know when anything's on.
It's funny. When I was 16, I was interning at the Boston Herald, and this was back in 2010, 2011-ish. And I remember the older readers of the newspaper would call the office and would ask me, what channel is the game on? And I think as an arrogant, like 16-year-old was just like, that's like insane that they're calling me. But, I'll Google where the channel, the game was, and the channel was, and I would tell them. I kind of wish I had that service now.
Right.
It feels like
I know ESPN has that service on their app, but I would never think to go to the ESPN app to find out when the Yankees are on.
Right. Like even with Google, sometimes I'll type in what channel is this game on, and it takes like a couple of clicks for me to figure it out. Like, I find that the Apple Sports app is decent too for that. It's kind of clean and simple. You can just find out where games are. But it's not easy. Like, it should be much easier than this.
Right. I use the Score app. The Score app is my favorite for scores and for that information. But sometimes they only give you, like, if it's a Yankee game, during the week, they might give me, like, let's say they're playing the Royals. The Score app will tell me where the game is in Kansas City. I need to know, like, the New York. But I know ESPN did a big thing with their app about finding the games. One last thing on this, and we'll sort of wrap it and move on just to a couple other things. But you wrote in the article, in 2004, Boston sports fans spent $1,321 a year to watch Boston teams. Now it's $4,785.
Oh, I forgot. Everything includes the cost of internet now too, because you didn't need to use the internet.
Right. My question is, do you see the costs going up this rapidly? Do you think because it looks like everything now is on streaming, there shouldn't be many new outlets that get a package with the league? The NBA just signed an 11-year deal. That the NFL's in the middle of a big deal. Baseball has to find a deal. I'm sure whatever it is, if they go to Peacock, the playoff games will be on they'll go to NBC. The playoff games will be on Peacock because that's it. But how do you see the cost thing going over the next few years?
I think it's probably stabilized a little bit.
Okay.
That doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that we locked into all these new deals and it's still going to be very expensive, probably for another decade, unless some sort of government legislation intervention happens. I think part of this issue too is that I think this has really been underplayed in regards to the media reporting around the cable networks just getting sports game, whether it's ESPN or TNT or Turner or whatever, is that a lot of these leagues now view broadcast as a more accessible place. Like the power dynamics have flipped there because
Yep.
in theory, anyone can get a digital antenna and plug into their TV and get ABC, CBS, Fox, whatever. The reality, though, is that most people probably aren't going out and getting a digital antenna and plugging into their TV. I think that there needs to be just an easier way to access those basic broadcast networks, PBS, Telemundo, all those channels, because, at the minimum, like fans should be able to access, the CBS football game, whatever is playing in your region, or the Fox baseball game on Saturday, or, the NBC basketball game. Like they should be able to access those things. I think that needs to be easier.
It's funny you say that, because what I was going to say is the impression I get overall from sports fans, if I'm going by people who read my column and send me emails, people on Twitter, people in my life, friends, family, the overall impression I get is that while the streaming may be a nuisance and the cost is offensive, the average typical sports fan really doesn't give a shit. Their mentality is, this is sports, this is my entertainment, I love this, I'm going to pay, and I'm not going to let this bother me. I feel like almost like the feedback I get, I feel like 90% of the sports fans fall into that category. What is your experience with that?
My experience is a little bit more split than that, because I have my friends who are like diehard sports fans the way that I am and are watching most nights. And I think that there's a level of these leagues taking advantage of the loyalty that fans have. Like their business model is almost completely reliant on that irrational level of emotional investment and loyalty being there. And I think that's one of the areas where I think fans have dramatically underestimated the amount of power that they have over owners and these leagues. So there's that. I think on the flip side of that, I think there's two camps right now, basically. I think that there's more people who are interested in sports than ever before. I think the way that they're interested in sports is different.
Right. Sure.
They're interested in kind of the more reality soap opera. I think that's part of why the Woj bomb became such a big deal when Twitter was starting to blow up. They're interested in that kind of engagement of sports, whether it's through a pop cultural lens, the way sports reflects culture, or even politics, the way that sports reflects society. I think that there's a lot of people who are kind of casual sports fans who are kind of interested in following those storylines. There's an opportunity for those people to become more day-to-day sports fans, but this massive gap in being able to access these games, the financial cost, is preventing those people from getting there. And I think on top of that too, the current media landscape is, I think, a little bit like almost antagonistic towards those types of sports fans, where I think whether it's because of the culture around sports, or at least the perceived culture around sports media, the hot takes, the yelling. And I say this as someone who has been on Around the Horn on these ESPN hot take shows. That kind of stuff does, I think, create, it makes it feel more intimidating to try to get interested in sports. Because if you're someone who's interested in sports from just like a reality show standpoint, and then you see Stephen A. Smith yelling on First Take about whatever, there's kind of like a gap of being like, why does he care so much about this to the point where he's yelling? And the gap is so big that you almost like kind of check out of it in the first place. I think that there's not really a bridge between like making the casual sports fan, which I truly think there's more of now than ever before, to become someone who's more like us, Jimmy, who's like watching games on a night-to-night basis. And I think the cost of that is a huge barrier to entry.
Yeah, and like the article points out, it's the cost of watching and the cost of going. The Knicks just wrapped up a playoff series with the Pacers. I mean, the ticket prices for those games, I mean, we're talking thousands. And my thought on that is, can you imagine paying that money, you go and the Knicks lose? Like, I can't, but people don't care. People
I've done
don't
that
care.
before with a Celtics
Yeah.
game. I think it was the Celtics Heat playoff game a couple of years ago. I paid maybe $250 because and I went to the game like basically kind of on a whim because the ticket prices were starting to fall and they lost. And I was just like, damn,
Right.
kind of sucks.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it's not just because they lost, it's the cash. I'm going to wrap it up with this. And I just want to talk about you and ESPN and your career. I do, you mentioned how it's all gone back to broadcast now and cable's on the way out. We saw that with the NBA contract. They got in bed with NBC and Amazon and left TNT out the window. I do, and I had said to you that I don't know if sports fans care that much about what's going on with their costs to be a sports fan. I do think the shit will hit the fan big time when the NFL finally, and I think it's happening much, much sooner than later. I don't know if they're going to completely kick CBS and Fox out the door and go to a streaming service, but I would be willing to bet any amount of money that you're going to see Netflix or YouTube or some streaming service have games on Sunday afternoons much sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, the conversations I've had with people on the media side about this, the executive side around the industry, is that's kind of the buzz right now, is that like Netflix is circling this situation. Have you looked at Netflix stock recently? It's skyrocketed in the last 2 years.
Right.
There was a point where people were kind of worried about Netflix as like the Maxes and the Amazon Primes and Apple TV. They were greenlighting all these shows, and Netflix had gone a little stale, and people weren't licensing out those shows. And I think when Suits blew up again because of Netflix, like it kind of reminded people like, oh wait, Netflix is kind of the new syndication now. Like if you get a show on Netflix, an old show can kind of find a new life again,
right,
and have social relevance again. And so I feel like that's part of what flipped all of this. I think Squid Game flipped all of it too. But
getting those NFL games on Christmas, I think was
totally
big. And they also acquired Monday Night Raw from the WWE, which was a rare thing for Netflix, which is it's live programming every week. So all of that all those things you mentioned and I mentioned all seem to happen in the same time span.
Yeah, Netflix is looming over all of this. I mean, I think, Amazon has done, I think, a good job with the Thursday Night Football broadcast. It feels premium, and I think that people are starting to kind of get over the fears around streaming, which is the buffering stuff. And is this going to feel, really good? I'm very curious to see what happens with how YouTube presents its football game in week 1, because I think Google and YouTube is a very underrated player in all of this. YouTube is the number 1 streaming app on TV now, more so than Netflix. Like YouTube is kind of replacing the viewing habits that people had with cable television, where, I'm kind of a nerd in this way. Like, I'll watch a video on like architecture trends from Architecture Digest, or some architect who's breaking down some building in a city, and we'll look at the architecture trends over the course of a couple of decades. And it's a 30-minute YouTube video, and just throw that on the TV as background noise as I'm like scrolling through Twitter at the same time.
Yeah.
That kind of show would not have been greenlit 15 years ago. Like it's so hyper specific because of the nature of YouTube and the way that the algorithm is so good at like suggesting content to people. Like that show has like a viable business model to be able to exist because millions of people can watch it, and so I think all of these trends, kind of tied together, where it's just like the internet's clearly where everything, like people have been saying this for 3 decades at this point, but like the streaming world is, the infrastructure for it is basically here. Like it's ready to go.
Right.
It's just a matter of like these rights deals expiring and people just getting a little bit more okay with it. And I do like, we'll see how these like leagues are kind of able to navigate all of this. Like if they're going to keep trying to squeeze people for as much money as possible. But, I think you're right. Like when I have discussions with people on the sports business side in the industry, like Netflix and YouTube in particular now, especially the last few months, I think is the big like Godzilla like force looming over everything, casting a giant shadow on everyone.
Yeah, I did that traditional CBS Fox Sunday for 1 o'clock, 4:25. I think it's going to go away sooner than people think. It's not happening this year or next year, but we'll see what happens. And Netflix, and I wouldn't worry about that YouTube game because, like I said, they're great on Sunday tickets. So I'm sure they're Now that's interesting because their game, that Friday night game that they have week 1, is free. A rare thing. You don't have to pay for that. It goes against June's whole article. A free game.
But it's
Um,
another place where people have to figure out how to
right,
watch it.
right. The person who's not that's what you said. This was one of the first things you said in this, and I didn't follow. And you and I are people who are tech savvy. I feel so bad for the person who's not tech savvy, who's a hardcore sports fan. I just feel awful for that person. And
One of my
you can
one of
sit
my
there and
really
say
good
they
friends from
should.
college. One of my
No, I'm
really
just
good
saying.
friends from college is a Philadelphia sports fan, and he was telling me like over Christmas, his mom was trying to find the Eagles game, and he had to be like, "Well, it's on Netflix and it's on this thing," and she's like, "Why can't I just get my Eagles game?" And like
Right.
that's probably the majority of people in the country, at least right
Absolutely.
now.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about you here for a sec because you've mentioned YouTube a lot. I'm curious because the pinned tweet on your Twitter page and your story goes that you got laid off from ESPN in 2023. I was laid off once from Fox Sports, and I feel like until that's happened to you, you don't know how horrific that is. So I know where you're coming from with everything you said in those videos. I was just curious though, ESPN had that much of a lockdown on, so they lay you off in 2023, and then you had a non-compete where you couldn't do anything for 2 years, like not even YouTube videos and all that. Was that just like a standard ESPN contract? Like I'm blown away that they were able to lay you off and then still block you from doing anything for 2 whole years.
So for context, I worked for ESPN for 4.5 years. Initially, I think I signed either a 2-year deal with an option or a 3-year deal. And then I re-signed in 2022 for a 3-year deal at ESPN. So I was, I think 16 months or maybe 18 months into my contract, or maybe 14 months, something along those lines when I got laid off. I had, I think 22 months left on the deal. And basically within a couple hours, I had a DM full of like executives and editors who had offers for things that I could do, which was very flattering. Among them, actually, this New York Times op-ed, I got an email from the New York Times about 2 hours after I got laid off. And so like that was something I wanted to do after I took a little bit of time off. And when I did get laid off, or when I did come back and I wanted to start doing stuff again, primarily like this New York Times op-ed and the YouTube channel, my representation went to ESPN to ask them, can we do this? I was 28 when I got laid off, 27 when I got laid off. So still relatively early in my career. And as you know, like momentum with this kind of stuff can kind of go away with a snap of a finger. And so, we asked them if I could do this stuff, and they kind of full forcedly blocked everything. And, I'm one person,
Right.
I come from, middle class family coming outside of Boston. Like, I didn't have, I wasn't going to like push the line there and like challenge ESPN by like just posting a YouTube video and seeing what happens and, getting a cease and desist. Like, I just wasn't going to do that. And also just like,
Right.
to be fair, like I got laid off and I got paid for
Right.
more than 2 years. Like
Right.
that is such a situation that I'm so grateful for. And I got to save money and figure out my next steps. Like there is an unbelievable amount of privilege that kind of comes with that. I think is the flip side of the massive amount of uncertainty that you've obviously gone through by working in this industry. But yeah, it was one of those situations where like I had a bunch of stuff I wanted to do, especially launch the YouTube channel. And I was told by ESPN, that it was against the non-compete and that the only way I could do that would be giving up the rest of the money on the contract. And, I'm just not in a place where I was able to do that.
Right. Of course. So tell me about those 2 years, because that's a long. I didn't work for a year before SI brought me back, and you know, it's the lowest of lows. And in terms of the sports, maybe you care about it a little less. What was your experience like not working for 2? And then, of course, you're always worried about, like you said, momentum's a big thing in this business. You worry when you come back. Does anyone care? Give me 2 years. I can't even imagine. So tell me what you went through there.
Yeah, I think a lot of working through some emotions on just like, do I really want to do this? You ask yourself that all the time. Those questions come up, but I think I truly didn't ever feel like I was going to leave. Like I can't really imagine myself doing anything else with my life. This is just what I've wanted to do for such a long time. And, frankly, like at ESPN, I wanted to do the YouTube channel there. Like I think I was pretty upfront with people at ESPN from the get go that like YouTube was my end game. It wasn't television. Like this is what I viewed my future as. I did YouTube
Let
as
me
a
I,
high schooler.
let me interrupt you. I'm just curious because YouTube now is the biggest thing. Everything now in this business is about YouTube, 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 YouTube. You were on that bandwagon now, it seems like 2 or 3 years ago. What did you see, or did you know something about
Well,
what?
I was on the YouTube bandwagon in high school. Like this is 2011. So my origins on YouTube go back to me. I'm in my childhood bedroom right now.
Right.
I was filming YouTube videos. If you go to my YouTube channel, like in my childhood bedroom as like a sophomore in high school, covering consumer technology. I was reviewing iPhone cases and headphones and basically shooting videos, from this space and figuring out how to tell stories on camera. And I found a decent following, like the same YouTube channel that I'm making videos on now. I think I got about 4,000 subscribers in high school, and I was making a couple $100 a month. And it was basically my job. Like instead of having a cashier job, which I also did working at a burger joint one summer, like I made YouTube videos about tech. What I saw happen when I got to college, I basically was just like, okay, do I want to try to go down this YouTube tech route? Being a YouTuber wasn't totally an established like career yet, but I was starting to see friends who were starting to able to make, like adult friends who are making like full livings out of doing this. And so I was just like, okay, there seems to be an opportunity here. Or do I want to like really pursue this sports media, sports writing thing? And for me, I just cared more about sports than I did about iPhones and technology. So I decided to go down the route. But that was always in the back of my head. Over the course of that time throughout college, and then especially into the kind of the early days of my career in sports media at Bleacher Report and the Washington Post, and I did some freelance writing for The Ringer in college. My friends who were in that tech YouTube space at the time, turned it into full careers. Like they had hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of subscribers. One of the most famous one is this guy Marquez Brownlee. He's I would say the Walt Mossberg or Kara Swisher of my generation. He's got 20 million YouTube subscribers, and he's getting at the minimum 1.5 million to 2 million videos a week talking about cell phones and consumer technology. And I saw him and a bunch of my other friends grow these production companies where they're these like kind of boutique media companies where they have production staff and they're filming these YouTube videos, and they're bringing in 7 to 8 figures of revenue every single year. And so during my time off, I went to one of my buddies in LA. His name is Austin Evans, and he works with another buddy of mine, Ken Bolito. They cover consumer technology. They've got an office building in the suburbs of Anaheim. They have about, I think, 20 employees. Austin and his wife are the kind of business heads of the company. Austin is the on-air talent. They've got 5 million subscribers. They're getting hundreds of thousands of views a week. And they're, I'm pretty sure, a 7-figure, small media company. And I've seen these business models, and, they're basically doing like editorial adjacent, with integrity, journalistic type content, reviewing consumer technology. And I looked at their business model, even back then, I was just like, oh, once sports culture is kind of ready to go into YouTube, it seems like this business model is directly transferable to sports, because ultimately they're building businesses on the trust that they develop with their audience by telling the truth about, the latest iPhone or Samsung Galaxy phone or whatever. And so that was kind of my mindset going into ESPN. And for one reason or another, for reasons I won't get into deeper today, like it didn't really work out. But for me, like the second I got laid off, I was just like, oh, this is the opportunity to like finally do the YouTube channel. Like,
Right.
Thankfully ESPN paid me, that I was able to save money, and I have a, big, I've got a big enough like safety net to be able to make this type of jump. I'm 30 years old. Like I don't have kids yet. I'm engaged to get married, but like I don't have kids yet. Like I don't have anyone depending on me yet. This is kind of the one time in my life where I feel like I can really make this like big jump and see what happens. And we're 2.5 months in, but I feel like I've learned way more than I could have ever even imagined, just going into this process.
That's great. It's wild how you were so far ahead of the curve there on YouTube. And everyone could check Joon out on YouTube. Joon Lee is the YouTube channel. Yahoo Sports just had a big Red Sox story on the Devers trade. Give me a little feedback. What was the response like to your time story on the cost of being a sports fan?
It's been really interesting. I mean, I've been getting emails from people around the country. It's been interesting getting, call requests, interview requests from sports radio shows around the country. I haven't been able to do all of them just because between the Devers story and the Time story, I just like have a lot of media requests at the current moment.
Right.
like I'm going to the local NBC Sports Boston station to talk about Rafael Devers for a half hour after this. Like, I just have there's a lot of things going on today, but
Yeah.
you know, it's been wild. I mean, like, I knew that this like was a problem for a lot of people, but I think seeing the scope in which it clearly resonated with people, not just in the US, but around the world, has been really interesting. I mean, you know, my editor at the Times yesterday told me that I think by 2 p.m. it had 1,600 comments on the story, and they had to shut down the comment section because it was just too active. And I was just like, oh, wow. Okay. So this is like, it's really resonating with people. And I think both stories between the Devers story and the Times column was on the front page of Reddit yesterday too. So it's been very interesting to see like, oh, this is like, I'm a crazy sports fan, but obviously like there's so many crazy sports fans around the country. I say crazy in a good way. You know, people are passionate about the things they care about. And I think it shows that like there is an appetite for sports and people want to be bigger sports fans, but all of these barriers, especially in the times that we live in right now, just they're making it harder to do. And they're really preying on the loyalty of the diehards to get through this.
Well, I'm glad you did this. I really like the way you did it with including the cost of going to a game, because I do feel like someone like me, I've bitched so long about streaming, but there is that we've forgotten about how absurd it is to go to a game if you want to, like, you know, have a drink and a hot dog and all that stuff, and then the cost of the ticket. So I'm glad it's been a busy week for you. I'm glad people are checking out your work. It's well deserved. And the Devers story as well, which we didn't even get into, but that's on Yahoo if you want to check that out. A lot of behind the scenes on why the Red Sox parted company with Devers in that shocking deal. Joon, appreciate you coming on. Everyone, like I said, check him out on YouTube. The story's on the New York Times. Let me give it again, $4,785. That's how much it costs to be a sports fan now. Thanks for coming on. Get to those other media commitments. I appreciate you squeezing me in, and be well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jimmy. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.